For most people watching anime this season, Akashic Records seems to stand out as one of the more popular series, with its in-depth magical system and overall world full of mysteries right from the word go. Unfortunately, both of these points are sadly wasted on the incredibly rushed adaptation we're given. And though I'm not familiar with the source material, the comments I've seen reading through the discussion seem to back up my thought that the anime tried to squeeze too much into too little time. As such, I just can't bring myself to like Akashic Records as much as many people seem to be enjoying it themselves, despite the inherent potential that lays within it. But I can at least recognize why it's so popular. Before that though, one of the biggest issues I personally have with the series is its immediate reliance on typical tropes that exist to get otaku and generic anime viewers invested. It's the same walking in on the girl's changing scene and physical abuse of the male lead character because of perceived sexual harassment that I've seen a million times before. It's all just so mind-numbing that I couldn't help but feel disappointed after watching the first episode. But even I know I'm in the minority on this, because a lot of people prefer fanservice and tropes to the actual story of the show, as the comments constantly tell me. Even though I say that isn't entirely true. And it requires a slant on my own views where I have to twist around and acknowledge that people watch anime for different reasons. In fact, a lot more people than one would think, especially as a critic, watch anime like this specifically for fanservice and other tropes. Or at least they aren't bothered by these scenes, because that's what's fun for them. This is why there's such a sharp discord between the people who dislike or find fanservice in shows like this unnecessary or tired, and those who just enjoy boobs and butts and other tropes. It's not even that they're necessarily less invested in the story than I am. It's just that they don't let it bother them because those tropes are part and parcel with viewing anime like this one. One simply needs to look at any discussion for the show to see that there are quite a few people who are totally excited and happy to see this show airing because of its intriguing magical system, characters they somehow find compelling, and a plot that entertains them despite its contrivances. But the issue here is complicated, because critics and analysts look for very different things when watching anime. It might be that we find these tropes unbearable because we've watched so many anime do the exact same scenes over and over again. It's also that we might prefer more plot and story than fanservice, or find fanservice has a specific time and place that it can be used effectively in certain stories. It might even be that, like me, it's very difficult to take a story seriously when the anime constantly interjects a scene that wants you to find it humorous without taking into consideration that tonal whiplash is far too much to keep suspending that disbelief. Yet, I still watched Akashic Records despite all this, and I find the fact that I did is pretty telling, because, like I've said in previous videos, I see the potential for greatness in the elements presented at the core idea of the plot these anime hide behind their tropes. That story that wants to be told, and even if the anime rarely, if ever, reaches that full potential, just the fact that it's there in the background, waiting to be possibly unleashed from the fanservice and generic tropes, was enough to keep me around to watch. I also just enjoy stories about people, so I can more easily ignore or withstand tropes and fanservice than some of the people I know. But perhaps that's simply because I haven't watched as much anime as other analysts, and I've not yet become world-weary enough to skip over a more average show like this one as a result. On the topic of potential, this anime's magic system is one of those interests I held fast to, because it's incredibly intricate, at least compared to the systems on display in other shows of its ilk. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this type of magic wouldn't look out of place in a Brandon Sanderson novel. Seriously, go read any book by him for in-depth amazing magic systems. The fact that chanting specific phrases casts a spell, but changing the sentences in any way affects the way the magic works, is fascinating to behold. And the explanation of the way it works was showcased very well, both through the lecture and actual examples as the teacher and his students tested out visually in the animation. The spell effects also look pretty nice for the CG involved, which unfortunately has the issue of causing the actual 2D animation to look substandard in comparison. But aside from that, another of the pieces that make the system work so well is that it follows the established rules set out in the beginning without continually contradicting it later on. The exceptions to the rules are rare, and explained very early on in a way that makes sense according to how magic works in the world. With the most notable examples of this featured in the original Magic, many of the major adult characters created themselves, along with the special amplification power Rumia has that is said to be exceedingly rare, and outlawed to the extent that those with power are killed when found. Pretty evil stuff. Similarly, the way the world is set up in the beginning puts quite a few mysteries in the viewer's direct line of sight, such as the flying castle in the sky that Sistine is so interested in, thanks to the mission her grandfather worked his whole life to figure out, as well as the conflict between the main characters and the antagonist of the series. On that note, the fact that the last guy is not related to the antagonist of the series thus far, but someone entirely different, is pretty confusing, honestly, and not a great way to end the anime as far as I'm concerned. By the same token, the anime never quite reached the potential I saw in it. This adaptation was sloppily handled, even for someone who has no experience with the source material. And in my opinion, many of the plot elements came in like a rush, as if the creators were just stitching together the story as fast as possible. It feels like there's a lot of cut corners, not only on the animation, but also what I can only imagine the fights in the source material would have looked like. The last episode's fight scene especially is guilty of this, as the duel between our main character and the guy who somehow ended up in the opening, despite only appearing the last few minutes of the last episode of the season, felt rather lackluster. Suffice to say, Akashic Records holds within it the potential for greatness, and even if it never realizes that potential how I would prefer, I still watch the show hoping for it to eventually do so. And even though it never did for me, it might have for the other people that ended up liking the show, because to them, it does realize that potential for any number of reasons. Newness to anime, preference for fan service, or any other reason that are just as valid as anything I can come up with to dislike it. People like to hate on critics for disparaging their favorite anime, but the point of this video I'm trying to make, aside from the review, is that people have different opinions on what is fun. For some, enjoying fan service and a simple story is enough. For others, picking those stories apart and ragging on overuse of generic tropes is the only thing that makes watching these shows bearable. And even aside from those, there's plenty of other degrees that other people can fall into. This point may seem a bit obvious, but I still think it bears repeating because of the constant hatred and bickering between people in the comments. That's really the same reason I end every video the same way. To remind people every time they watch my videos that fun is what you make it. But enough of all this reviewing and trying to teach lesson stuff. If you had fun listening to my thoughts on Akashic Records, consider subscribing to me on YouTube and clicking that notification bell so you can be alerted whenever I make a new video. And remember to share this video with all your friends and acquaintances so they too can have fun listening to me talk. Of course, if you want to talk to me directly instead of just listening all the time, hit me up on Twitter anytime to talk about anything you want to talk about. I'm free basically all the time. In the end, remember to always enjoy the way you watch anime. Because as long as you're having fun, that's all that really matters. See you next time.